Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see you here for the second day of Pathfindings, Africa and the Middle East. Right now, we have a talk by the esteemed Guven Tatak, who is going to be giving an awesome talk called A Bug's Journey. And I'm going to turn it over to Guven. Enjoy.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. So, okay, hello everyone. So my title is A Bug's Journey: How a Game Development Community Center has turned into an education sandbox. So let me just shortly introduce myself. I studied architecture, and while I was studying architecture, I was shooting short films, but at the same time, I was writing in games magazines as a critic. And then I found myself in the academia. I thought that it would be a safe space to, to both continue to shoot my films, but at the same time work on games. I mean, it started like that, but since during those times in Turkey, especially, I'm talking about at the beginning of, let's say, 2000s, there was a lot of needs in terms of game studies, game design education, game development education. So I find myself to join forces with the community and actually establish a game lab called Bug Lab. It's short for Bahçeşehir University Game Lab, based in Turkey, Istanbul. So first of all, I'd like to talk about a bit about Bug Lab, and then I will get into details how we benefit from the experiences and how we structured Bug Lab, which also helped us to structure game design and development curriculums in Turkey, which will be the first of their kinds, actually. So Bug Lab started with actually a documentary. Like we shot a documentary called Game Doc, Game Scene in Turkey, and in 2011, like 10 years ago. And so during that, with that documentary, we interviewed the leading actors of the game scene in that time, and asked about surely their obstacles, their their motivations, and what we really lack in Turkey in terms of the game industry, the game scene. So it was definitely a good start for us, because we learned the needs of the scene, the needs of the country, the companies, the students, the academics, and then in 2012, which is 10 years ago, and actually we are celebrating our 10th year this year. So we started with an experimental workshop, so that it was it was a proof of concept, actually, we can really invite people, gather people, and actually work on games together. So it was let's say that it was a pilot event for us. But then we continue actually our foundation event, which is called Bug Game Workshops. It was a boot camp event for 3 weeks. So and during that 3-week boot camp, we learned a lot, especially about how we can use I mean, how we can first of all train people for game design and development. So it was really a good experience, but just to be honest, it was just the beginning. And we continued with this time a 6-week boot camp. This time it was about mobile games especially, and it was sponsored by the leading GSM operator Turkcell in Turkey. So this time we expand our structure with a 6-week bootcamp, and tried some new experiments, and surely gained some new experiences. And definitely game jams and global game jams, especially hosted by Bug Lab, like we learned a lot from the game jams, and it was also a common ground for the scene to to meet, to come together, to share experiences, and also it was like we also observed those game jams a lot, like how people learn, how people share things. Because as you know, like game design, game development is not an easy task, and it's a very difficult task if you are a solo. So you have to be a team, but also you should work well as a team. So we find a lot of good or let's say best practices in game jams, definitely. And afterwards, like by the way, I'm trying to really skip that history of Bug Lab very shortly. After that, let's say a lot of events, boot camps, game jams, hackathons. Like with the synergy and energy of those events, we founded our first educational program, which was a graduate program on game design. We call it Master Bug. And soon afterwards, we founded this time the undergrad, which we call Bug Junior, depending on the experience we got from the master program. Because our goal was to, first of all, a bit like train the trainers, because as you can imagine, just like the industry lacks professionals, but also the academia lacks instructors, academics. So we also have to find them, train them. And so like in our education pipeline, we cover from like non-digital games to new texts like virtual reality and mocap and such. So we try to be very broad in that sense. And eventually, this whole structure, like with some other components, like every year, we had that kind of a structure at the end, which I'm really proud to share with you, and I hope it could be a good inspiration for the region, for Africa and Middle East. So at the end, now we have like 2 master's program, an undergrad program, and pre-incubation center, a VR lab, and such. And even this year we had another component, which I'll like to talk more about later on, but shortly it's called Bug Lab TechMer, and it's short for Tech Center. And this time, this center is supported by the government actually. So Bug Lab has turned into a kind of a boutique techno-city or techno-park, which now we can host the game studios, the companies, the various companies of game industry, like officially this time, and they could benefit from the, let's say, some advantages of, let's say, tax advantages, insurance advantages, and such, and plus also the mentoring of the Bug Lab, the experience of the Bug Lab. So overall, it is this structure. So now, but let me continue with my with our experiences actually. So okay, yeah. First of all, I'd like to a bit talk about the design concept itself, because it is always a bit vague concept, right? It is. I mean, we can say that it's about like problem solving. It's about techniques plus aesthetics and such, but it's always a bit like ambiguous and also an ambitious concept. And uh, surely we can see the traces of this concept in, we can follow the ambiguity of this concept in education and in a design studio too. Um, so usually it's not really clear. That's what I'm trying to say. Both the concept, the education, and the studio part, and um, and to define those, to define that like, yeah, to define the this unclear concept. There are some other, let's say, definitions, or let's say uh, some, yeah, some titles, like we can call the design process itself, like we can say it's a black box, right? So like we can you know, like it's a mystery, like we don't know what's in that box. Even another approach is, we can say that black hole, which is this time, it's like multidimensional. We have all this, let's say, energy is sucked up, and it's open to very different kind of clashes, which we can call design accidents. Okay, so that black box and black hole are, let's say, theories or approaches from the design field, And what I want to bring to that, or like try to add to those, is the magic circle concept, actually. So surely it's not a concept I found. It's a concept by the famous, let's say, the like very, let's say, famous in, especially in the academia of, like, the game studies, Johan Huizinga, and it and it's like which is like firstly announced in his book called Homo Ludens. So he's saying that the arena, the card table, the magic circle, the temple, the stage, the screen, the tennis court, the court of justice, etc., are all in form and function as like playgrounds with which special rules obtain. And like like very basically, we can like think it's a magic circle, like that. Like in real world, actually, you kick a ball in the net, but in a magic circle, you score a goal. Okay, so you accept the rules of that field, and you have new roles, actually, and you accept all that as like voluntarily. So so when I, checked all those things we have done as bug lab, as those events, which I told you, like game jams, hackathons, and such. So I try to like look at them like through the lens of the magic circle concept, and how I can like turn it, how I can benefit from it to this time to design our own programs, like education programs. So, uh, so, so what I came up with is that first, I take the magic, and I try to, use it as a reference for a playful curriculum, especially for both the master and the undergrad program. And the circle is, I take that part as the community, like who volunteer to uh, to to study in games, to work on games and such. And 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 when I say community, so I also like divide it into two. Like, as you are like familiar from the game design pipeline, we talk a lot about the mechanics and dynamics. Like, mechanics are the actions we execute in a game, and the dynamics is mostly like how the player reacted, uh, uh, how the player reacted or reacts to those mechanics designed by the game designer. Okay, so the community mechanics, I take them as, let's say, methods the actions like we can execute, and the dynamics are like how the community itself like reacted to those events, to those executed actions. So when I say community mechanics, I checked out the events we did. I checked out the event formats like we covered uh, during that time. So we did game jams, which is, let's say, game development marathons, which we can call them. Demo days, where we exhibit projects, meetups where people gather for networking and for some other purposes. Master classes are, given by, let's say, experts in their fields. Workshops and seminars, again, some, let's say, uh, short, let's say, sessions by professionals to transfer know-how. And postmortems this time, which we, this time check out the games, the produced works as case studies, both failures and success stories, and boot camps definitely, which this time is a format where we teach and learn at the same time. So I try to take each mechanic, each community mechanic, and try to integrate it to the curriculum, to the courses we have. And game jams actually has become a kind of like a threshold for the final projects of that semester, and they become an intro, especially. Like, for example, every semester for both our master and undergrad program, which they come together, we organize Bug Fall Jam and Bug Spring Jam. So during that 48-hour marathon, the students, come together. It's also like you can think it as like a big party, but at the same time, they start their first prototypes, first team building experiments for their final projects in that semester related with the courses. Even besides those, let's say, Bug Fall Jam, Bug Spring Jam events, we also from time to time have some international game jam events, which we collab with some other institutions, other, let's say, universities. For example, with that one, which we collaborated with the Iran Game Development Institute, which we called TIP, Tehran Istanbul Play. So it was this time like a 1-week game jam event, and students from both Iran Game Development Institute and Bug Lab, they come together and they work on games together. And even afterward, it wasn't a competition, but we some teams have really accomplished great works, great games, so we wanted to reward them. And afterwards, we took those successful projects to Tehran Game Convention, Casual Connect, Game Industry Conference in Poland, Poznan. And yeah, so I'm trying to say that those game jams, like organized internally or with a collab with other institutions, could lead your students and also the works to let's say to other even conferences, countries, and surely opportunities. So, and another community mechanic, demo games, which we turn into another mechanic from the the community demo days, and we turn them into student exhibitions. So this time you can think it as a kind of like a picnic environment, and like we exhibited the works of the students. We invite the professionals, the instructors, so that they so that they can find some, let's say, space to get feedback and even like iterate on their games. So even some games they developed like found some exposure from the press, and even we took those games to some expos. So from that demo days, um, they could really again use this mechanic as an opportunity to make a jump to other like events, to other, let's say, platforms, definitely. Like the one here, like Gaming Istanbul Expo, like we exhibited the games there, not just at school, but also at some like external platforms, definitely. Meetups, another mechanic from another mechanic. So with meetups, we turn them into field trips, because so we try to encourage our students to meet people like outside of the university too, because they can meet. Surely we organize meetups at school too, inside Bagleb, but also we'd like them to also, expand their, experiences and their network. So, like we organize field trips, summer schools, like for example, from Games Week Berlin, like Gamescom Expo, and such. So all those, like just like I mentioned, Tehran Game Convention. So all those events, all those field trips really contributed to their experiences of the students, surely. Another component from the community, masterclasses, which we turned into some experience sessions, definitely. So we try to invite, really, let's say, like professionals who are really master their, let's say, skills, but at the same time, who also worked in some important projects, let's say, important companies, big companies, so that they could really share the, let's say, the up-to-date, the cutting-edge experiences with the students. So surely masterclasses are also based on some like budgets too. So we try to find budgets from some other studios, other companies, which we also invite them to benefit from that know-how too. So we always try to create those win-win situations. Workshops and seminars, another mechanic from the community we take. We turn them into course modules. So we invited a lot of, let's say, people like locally and globally. They give workshops, seminars to us, which we integrate those like, let's say, mini sessions to the courses actually. Postmortems, which we turn them into like course juries, especially the project classes. Like at the end of every project class, we want this student teams to really do a postmortem of the project, which we also evaluate at the same time. But those final presentations turn into really important case studies. And the last mechanic is boot camps, which are which is a format where you teach and learn at the same time, were really good events which we can experiment on curriculum, definitely. Yeah, just like I told you with the first even with the first bug game workshops, boot camp, and the others, they experimented on different, let's say, schedules, programs, and earned a lot of XP, definitely. And at that, while I was like trying to integrate all those community mechanics to our curriculums, even when I'm not practicing architecture, my architect instincts, like alarmed, and I try to find some roots in design, actually, about this community mechanics and how they are related with education. And I was right. So when I checked the design movements called like Bauhaus, like it's a very, let's say, like critically acclaimed design movements, which influenced a lot of other, let's say, design movements and some like other theories and practices all around the world, which is founded like in 1999. It's a school called Bauhaus. So, which I studied which I really studied closely during my studies, during my years, like when I was a student studying architecture. So I found that there are really interesting similarities with the Bauhaus movement, with the Bauhaus school, which I was trying to, do with the game scene community, where I was trying to, take the mechanics from the community, from the game dev community, and integrate it to the game design development curriculums. So in Bauhaus, it's also, so they have the workshops, the master apprentice approach, the interdisciplinary play and work, and surely a lot of activities, like even they they organize workshops, like they try different, let's say, schedules, and they try to, they do organize those workshops with uh, let's say, the important figures from that time, like important architects, but not just architects, but also like painters, artists, and such. Surely they really value the master apprentice approach, so they always try to work together in the studio environment. So just like we are doing at BugLab, actually. Interdisciplinarity is also a very critical approach of Bauhaus, which we also try to still continue with that approach. So it's not just about video games, it's not just about the entertainment industry, but it's also about the medium, the concept, the medium, and taking the game as the medium and the concept, and trying to find the relations with other disciplines and also life itself. So so that's why we also like really trying to focus on game studies, how games is a part of the culture, life itself, and how we can, like benefit from those concepts in our other works and such. Play and work is also an important concept from Bauhaus, which they summarize it like that: play becomes party, party becomes work, work becomes play. By this concept is by the Meister Johannes Itten, who was an instructor and an artist in Bauhaus. So so it's again like with our events, we also try to have fun, because if we can't have fun, we can't come up with some interesting game ideas, even like work there for hours. So that's why we always try to have that loop of play, party, work. Activities. So surely, just like in Bauhaus, the activities really motivated the community, and even from the poster to the event itself, it should be. I mean, they all should be designed very carefully. Yeah. So this time, another quote from this time, the founder of the Bauhaus, called Walter Gropius. So theater, lectures, poetry, music, costume balls, creation of festive ceremonies in these gatherings. So it's a very critical thing. Those activities, like which are also connected with the courses themselves. So just like we are also trying to, connect all those sort of activities with the courses at Baglev. So at the end, so after this, let's say, Bauhaus research I did, and I find the similarities of what actually we are doing in Baglev. So I came up with a kind of like a basic formula for the structure of a game design or game development courses, which is integrated with the yeah, with the community mechanics. So if we think like a one semester, we have the courses like the 14-week courses. We have a 14-week curriculum. So we integrate master classes and workshops to the courses, and we use game jams as a breaking point, as a threshold to start to actually throw the students into water, but at the same time let them have fun all together, but also try new things, experiment new things, meet each other, and actually make an introduction for their final project, which could lead them, which they present at the end of the semester. They do a post-mortem of their project, and also we try to exhibit those projects in demo days, which can take them to some other events like conferences, expos, or I don't know, like other events like all around the world. So it could be a good jumpstart point for them. So now let's talk a bit about the community dynamics. So community mechanics were about like how we can use those formats, like what we are doing in as a community, and how we can like integrate them. So how did the community react to those let's say experiments like we did so far? So so as a result, we had new magic circles at Baglev. So like I'd like to just like go through them like very shortly. So as a result, master bug students like they are turned into trainers for the undergrad programs. So they are turned into bug junior instructors. Bug junior students at the same time, they help the master bugs as in their projects. So they became the assistants of them. In a way, they assist their projects. So so the teams in our pre-incubation center, which we call Bug Kitchen, they turned into as the mentors of the Bug Lab. For example, like Celtic Games is one of them. It's a studio we pre-incubated. So our students like work in their first game, which was a great success, Stygian. And even afterwards, we found a joint production model, which we call Zenith League with them. And this time we worked on another game called Kes and the Other Lives. By the way, it will be released on Monday. We are very excited about it. This time, like both the students and the professionals from Celtic Games, they work together in that project. So it's a commercial project which the students actually work. And this is like the part of the Zenith League project. Even we continue to develop projects for some, let's say, external clients with our students. And then surely the Bug Lab students, both junior and master, and they turn into Bug Kitchen interns. So because in a way they can do their internships at the studios which we pre-incubate at Bug Kitchen, and even after their internships, they could turn into teams. This time they could turn into some let's say startups. Okay, for example, like Sushi Games is one of them. They founded their team as they were master students, master bug students. They come together at the bug kitchen, and then they become a team at bug kitchen, and they now mentor the young ones, the juniors. And eventually, those bug kitchen teams, the experience we got was really, so we, documented all that, and then we applied to the government, to the related, office, and we earned the title called PathfindinGS, which is called Tech Center, which is short for Tech Center in Turkish. So now it is an official, let's say, like governmental structure too, which is like which we can provide advantages for the studios, for the companies, plus the studios as startups. Okay, so eventually, like it's like a kind of like a cycle, which we try to create a cycle which all those different bug components feed each other, and so we try to come up with those kind of loops. And at the end, we like if I have to like talk about some numbers, now we kind of like almost like 500 students at Bug Lab, and surely we still try to continue with the community approach. We still try to help the community, not just our students but the community in Istanbul, to with events, with like mentoring. So we invite them to this new incubation center called Tekmer, because they can also apply. So it's not just for our students. So we always try to share what we have. Yeah, still Bug Lab is the only hub with this approach in Turkey, and even maybe in the region, because I haven't encountered a structure like that. What's next? Surely we will continue to to game the system and change the rules, because it's a very dynamic field. So you should really adapt with the new text, new approaches, new like behaviors, right? So that's why we always would like to keep it as a kind of like a game design process. So we will continue to play test all that with new features, because whenever we will add a new feature, a new thing to the structure, we have to play test it and see how it goes, and see how like what kind of experiences we have after that, and which brings us to iteration. So we will continue to iterate this Bug Lab structure, because otherwise, if we just stop at some point, probably it will soon it can like fade out. It cannot catch the spirit of time. It cannot catch the zeitgeist, right? We also think about some quest and level system maybe, and even for that, probably I would dig deeply again in Bauhaus, because the Bauhaus also, that school, that design movement, also has some other let's say experiments they did. So I would also like to check again Bauhaus, dig deep, and find some other let's say components, probably, which could maybe help us to design some quest systems, some level systems in our curriculums and events. And maybe you would ask that, like, what about the pandemic, right? Because because during the last 2.5 years, so everything has changed. So how we adapted to that like unfortunate times. So surely it wasn't easy, to be honest. But what we did is we tried to, for example, we had that space we called Bug Kitchen, which is the pre-incubation, our pre-incubation center, where the students, let's say, like co-work, but also they can turn into let's say, they can turn into teams there. So what we did is we had a digital twin of Bug Kitchen in our Discord server. So we try to, really mimic the spaces there, the rules there, the transitions there, and we really try to divide the, divide or design the uh, Bug Labs Discord server regarding with the different roles like Master Bug, Bug Junior, like professional studios. So we try to still surely we work on that. We try to have a digital twin of our structure and surely continue the events like online, and we still try to build some like hybrid systems too. It's not easy. Like we are still I'm I must say that we are still learning, but we with every event we learn a lot. So we use, besides Discord, we also use the Twitch platform. So we stream our sessions and even try to understand the mechanics of Twitch and the dynamics. So it's a platform which is like open to commands, right? And surely we use this opportunity to this time to to host some very famous international guests. So because sometimes it's always not feasible to have a international guest, because you will have to find the budget and such. But if you have if you have like good relations, they can also be your guest online too, which we also try to use that opportunity. Even we hosted the Global Game Jam online. We tried it, and yeah, it was not easy, but I think it was a good experience, definitely. So thank you for having me, and also listening to my presentation. And I hope those practices we have could inspire some new game labs, could trigger some new new ideas. And and just like I said, we are still experimenting. We still iterate on our structure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Govind. That was such a great talk. Please, if you have any questions, those of you who are watching, go ahead and post them in chat and I will ask them for you. But I wanted to say that I thought it was really interesting how you brought Bauhaus in and how that related to the way that you designed the whole Bug Lab experience. I
Yeah,
thought
it
that was
was.
cool.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I started first of all actually that idea came to me a bit later. Like I kind of like, because I thought that okay, I remember things like that from history, and so then let me check my studies. So that's why it was probably I started, let's say, with an intuition, but then when I checked my studies, so that's how I discovered that where that intuition like came from, actually from Bauhaus. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. And the way that everything works together so students can start in Bug Junior and kind of interact with everyone else. And
Exactly. Yeah, we are trying to build some like systems which just like games are like rule-based systems, and we are trying to create those systems so that it's efficient, so it can continue without taking support, right?
right. Yeah, I think it's really brilliant what you've created. And so
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you so much for presenting this to us. We don't, your presentation was really amazing, and we don't have any questions because I think it was so thorough.
Okay, I mean they can always reach me uh, from Twitter, from my email. Even I'm the architect of the structure, but it I wasn't alone. So a lot of community members, studios, teams, students, other instructors like help me on that. So it's not just a solo work, definitely, and it can't be. So that's why I always like to share those experiences with the other, let's say, spaces, universities in the region, because like Middle East and Africa are not really, you know, like developing things like that is not easy in those
Oh,
regions. So that's why I'm always ready to share more.
thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here. We really loved having you. So have everyone, we have don't go anywhere. We've got another talk coming up, and we will see you all in a few minutes. Bye. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are so excited to have you here. Our next talk is by Glenn Gillis, who is the chairperson of Games for Change Africa. And I hand it over to you, Glenn. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much indeed, Suzanne. It's so wonderful to be able to share the exciting stories coming out of Africa, South Africa, Cape Town in particular, with the world. And yeah, we're really grateful to share some ideas, some insights, and just to open ourselves up to the conversation, because we've come a long way and we know that it's not really about the answers. It's really about the questions and the relationships and partnerships that we form. So I really appreciate it. So as Suzanne mentioned, I am the interim chair for Games for Change Africa, going to give you insight into what we are going to achieve together, and some exciting news about Africa Games Week, which we will be part of coming up in a week from now. But I thought it would be useful to give you a sense of my perspective, and that's really been born on the back of my day job, which is the CEO of Sea Monster. So we've been around for 11 and a half years now. We've got about 50, 60 people in our full-time ecosystem, and we focus exclusively on using the power of games to change the world for the better. So we do a lot of work with banks, insurance companies, and the like around financial education, entrepreneurship, But of course, there's not a challenge in the world that wouldn't be made better with a game. And I thought I would just give you a sense of that perspective, and happy to share more on that and case studies. But really, today I'm here wearing the hat I wear between 2 and 4 in the morning, which is as the chairperson. And we've been massive fans of Games for Change. As you know, they've been based out of New York. They've been doing this for coming up for 20 years now. They have chapters all over the world, and we noticed that, of course, they didn't have a chapter in Africa. And so we felt that we needed to make a change, and we put our hands up and earned their trust over many, many years of getting to know each other and making sure that our visions are aligned. And so we joined the family, which is really people like us, people like you, who really do want to see games driving the world to make it a better place. So what I thought we'd do in our 20-odd minutes that we've got together today is probably tell you something that you already know, but if you don't, just a lens on what impact games or Games for Change could be all about and how we define that. And again, give you a sense of that perspective. But in order to make sure that there's some take-home value for you, we also felt that we'd just share some perspectives on what is happening across the continent. Of course, it's a very dangerous thing to do because 54 countries, 1.2+ billion people, many, many cultures and languages. And of course, you have to speak in generalities. So please forgive me upfront for making some sweeping statements, but you know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the opportunity to share some insights that we've garnered, and these are based on the research that we and others have been doing. And then, of course, there's a rousing call for action, which we hope will inspire you to also join our cause. Often we do. I guess we could debate this forever. You know, so what is a serious game? What is an impact game? And where does entertainment begin and learning start? Well, you know, that's a debate that academics have been waging forever, and it's an important one, and it's important that we bring frameworks to change to bear over this stuff. We're much more practical, and we're very keen just to see that games and of course gamification in its broadest sense really is just used, as I mentioned up front, to make the world a better place. And so at the very highest level, whether that's making things that are purely based on entertainment but are actually delivering positive impact, we'll take it, you know, and then of course all the way through to the more serious stuff of what it is. But let me tell you a story, and the story is of stories, and in some sense those were born in Africa. You know, stories are how we shape ourselves in the world. Stories are how we give ourselves hope, how we paint a picture of what a better tomorrow is going to look like. And everything we do puts story at the center of it, whether it is just really honoring our user personas, our characters, and their hero journeys in a game, as hidden or obvious as that might be. We really do believe that we are a part of a much bigger collective, and that is the one that is really helping to shape better stories out of Africa and into Africa and about Africa. And if stories are how we make sense of the world, you know, we can kind of lean back and whether it's amazing animation that's coming out of the continent or live action or even Wakanda, dare I say, you know, there's a role in this for the media industry in the filmmaking sense. I love that sense about lean back experiences. But of course, our passion is for the lean in experiences that unlocks the power of agency, that huge responsibility that we as game makers have to understand that we are going to give our players the power of choice. And through that power, they can begin to influence not just how things are acting in the game and behaving and responding in the game, but hopefully we can unlock a much deeper power. And that is that, yes, Africa and the people on the continent are not passive observers of the creative economy and the world as a whole, that they are active participants and that they can shape their own destinies and their own lives. And in an essence, everything else is secondary to that idea. So we're always inspired by zooming out and looking at how the habit-forming power that comes with games can be used to really drive learning. You know, if games are a voluntary activity, is learning really voluntary? Or when last was it playful and fun and engaging and all those things that we can do? And of course, our continent has all of the world's challenges at scale. Poverty, gender, diversity, you know, these aren't even topics. These are our harsh truths, but they are also the incredible opportunities that the continent faces. And we take a somewhat edgy view on this, one which we hope will resonate with you too, because it's really about the power of marketing in its general sense, about the power of corporates to be involved. And we're going to really take a bit of a deep dive now into how there is this interplay between the brands, the corporates, some social impact learning spaces, and how that can be used in the gaming industry. So if you don't know it by now, serious games are serious business. It's growing massively everywhere. COVID has helped. It's been obvious to us in the gaming space forever that traditional e-learning activities don't work. And that, you know, we're not really unlocking the power of, let's call them AAA gaming, and bringing them to bear on some of the world's most wicked challenges. People are now seeing that. And so this is a serious industry across a number of verticals. I don't think you need any convincing about that. Here's the problem. How much of that is actually inspired by our stories? How much of that is unlocking the power of the creativity on the continent? How much of that is being made and produced on the continent, and how much is that is owned by Africans? And that's really going to be the basis of what we want to explore with you over the next 10 odd minutes that we have together. And if you think about it, that's really the value chain, isn't it? Concept, production, distribution, we can give it all sorts of fancy titles. Nobody would be surprised to know that we have this incredible store of culture and heroes, creativity, and this is not being used. It really isn't. There's 1 billion odd participants in the African economy, and surely we have our own stories, and we need to be able to tell them in our own voice. That authenticity that comes with that will resonate not just on the continent, but will absolutely resonate around the world. And that's something we believe in. And people on the continent no longer expect their governments to do stuff for us. You know, we don't have the luxury that many in the West do, where we have ecosystems that are supported by governments. In fact, it's the Western governments, Germany and France specifically, who are very involved in unlocking the potential on the continent. But that means that it's up to us. And that's good, because that hustle factor is really what you need when you build a game, isn't it? It's not exactly the most linear career path or the most linear production process. And that in turn leads to these incredible markets, these incredible activities. And here's the thing. So often what we see is that people, as much goodwill as they tend to focus on the supply side issues. And overwhelmingly, most of us on the continent actually believe that what we really need is scalable, predictable demand. That's the topic of the conversation that we're going to have with you today. It's really about saying, if we want to get this momentum building, unlock this incredible potential that exists, it's not going to come from feeding more entry-level people into the bottom of, I'm going to call it the pyramid, whether that's the skills pyramid or the business pyramid or just giving, concept a light touch and saying, oh, that's very nice and very sweet. And yes, I've done my piece for diversity and inclusion, tick. We believe in the industrial creative economy and that potential. And like every other economy and industry, it really does work with somebody coming up with an idea, convincing somebody with money to allow you to make it. And unfortunately, so often we see that we're not then really taking these things to market. And I would say probably the single biggest failing in Africa is this ability to really understand all the nuances of demand creation, user acquisition, and I mean that both in the entertainment space, but also across the impact gaming space. And because without that return, of course, we don't get the flywheel spinning up. So there's untapped potential. We have these incredible stories. We have games that nobody in the world has seen, compelling, interesting games, new spins on old things. And so many people on the continent don't just want to do this in a way that just makes money in the traditional sense, but also is driving some impact beyond just purpose. And we think those things are completely reconcilable and can be held together. Because if we don't get over ourselves, then we're always going to be reliant on grants or governments or learning institutions, schools. Those guys have limited resources, and perhaps more so now than ever with the world going through the crisis that it is. And of course, we know that they also have challenges getting their brilliant games, often brilliantly researched, clearly scientifically validated, but getting them to scale. But we do know that we can get a lot of learnings from the entertainment industry because, of course, we understand exactly who pays and who plays, and that those two don't necessarily need to be the same thing. Yes, the entertainment space is very noisy, but it also has a rich store of knowledge and experience on how to build communities, how to get them to engage with the game in the first place and re-engage. And we need to find ways to kind of bring that across and into the social impact space and learning space. And here's the big idea. If it is true that most casual games in the world are funded by adverts, it means that the big brands, the big corporates, do value the audience. And if they value that audience, and if they can stop, I'm going to say, just advertising to us, and actually start to take some of their purpose-led stuff and weave that into the games, we can get the firepower, the distribution, the cash that we need from the big brands. We've got the next billion game players, customers, staff, call them what you want. They're all of those things are going to come out of Africa. We have the youngest continent. And so for us, we're always interested in this interplay between corporates and entertainment industry and how we can use that in serious gaming. One last idea on this, and that is the Millennium Development Goals, which became the SDGs, talk about the environment, they talk about the social impact. And big corporates now have to take those things seriously. The government signed up, the corporates are committing it. It's going to start to affect the cost of their capital. Banks are going to start to wonder what you're doing in the world when they lend you money. That's a brilliant opportunity for corporates to stop advertising at us and actually tell us what they're doing as on their journeys to embedding the SDGs. And games are, of course, the perfect, and I would argue the best, and probably one of the only ways that you can do that at massive scale and in a way that is sustainable and makes everyone better. Because once we get that, we can start to unlock the pockets of excellence that we see across the continent. as the chairperson, as a participant in many forums across Africa and across the world, I see incredible things. Every day I meet new people that I didn't know before. And it's sad that so many of us are kind of struggling and lurching around. We're all small businesses. Sea Monster, my day job, we're probably the largest impact gaming company on the continent, maybe top 3. And we've got 60 people and we turn over less than $2 million a year. So can you imagine the potential that comes from bringing all that production capability together? And of course, I know this is corny, guys, and you've probably seen it a million times, and other people even today would say this. But, you know, in Africa, you can't grow a gaming studio. You have to grow an ecosystem within which your gaming studio can prosper. And so this is so much more than just a proverb for us. It is, in fact, a big call to action to say it is through partnerships, it is through doing things together that we are going to get to this production level scale, this ability to compete globally. You're going to see AAA games coming out of the continent, without doubt. But I think you're also going to see very new ways of working. Wouldn't it be amazing to come to Cape Town? No, it's beautiful. It's a summer's day outside. It's incredible. And picking up the pockets of excellence in Ghana and Kenya, and it's too many countries to even mention, and bringing us together with the best expertise. We're not going to be just your low-cost destination. That's not what we're about. There are other regions that are probably better suited and, I'm going to say, cheaper than we are. But we're going to bring this richness, this authenticity, this newness, this innovation, which I think you're only really going to get through true partnerships and joining us on that journey and figuring out new models about how we do that together. So many gamers don't even like to think about any of these things. Whenever somebody walks through the door here and they say, oh, I've got a new game idea, I always say, don't tell me the idea. Who's the customer? Who pays? Why are they going to come? How are you going to get it to them? And they're like, no, let me tell you about the idea. I'm like, guys, it doesn't work that way. Like every industry in the world, unless we've got real know-how, real partnerships, unless we've solved some really wicked problems that exist, payment issues, taxation issues, there's no one currency. Governments here are fragmented, their policies are ancient, their bureaucracy, their corruption, dare I say. But that's all good because we can do this differently, and we can do this using new technologies, new ways of distribution, and new ways of really not just selling at somebody, but in getting them to join on a journey to engage with brands, with markets, and of course, sell games in the traditional way. Because the upside of this is phenomenal. The potential that exists here to shift behavior change on a massive scale to solve the most wicked problems we have as a society exists here. We're not caught up in old thinking mentality. Yes, of course, there are many people who are, but you will find so many who are not, who are ready to take that next step. And with that shift in behavior, whether it is in the learning space, around the environment, because, hey, the environment is not what you think, it's only what you do, or in marketing, or just give us a challenge, because that will inform the scientific data that we know games can drive. This is not about trading opinions about which piece of creative works or not. We've got the know-how. We know how to do this. Games everywhere are being used in universities and everywhere, and are informing the creative process using proper science and proper insights. Again, who's interested in insights and data? Big brands, opportunity to make money. Because without that, we don't ever get that flywheel really kind of spinning. And so there is an opportunity to partner with us, to join us, to think about what you're doing, how it might benefit from a new way of partnering or working together, or in fact, just doing business around some of these things. And please don't think that we are looking for anyone's pities or handouts. That's not a mentality that anyone I know subscribes to. We see the challenges on the planet. We see the challenges facing humanity. And we know that this is a crisis that is unfolding on our watch. It is our responsibility to do things dramatically and now and at scale and differently. So please, if you want to reach out, if you want to partner, if you want to have the conversation, join us. There will be many opportunities to continue this debate. Let me give you a quick shout out for Games for Change. So 1st and 2nd of December in Cape Town. It's amazing. We are curating the serious gaming panels, talks, workshops for 2 days. Some of the best and brightest minds from the continent and in fact from around the world will be here. So follow us on social media, click on our website. Yeah, it's just like a web page, but hey, just reach out and offer to make our website better. But yeah, you'll find out more about that, but also drop me a mail anytime. Always happy to pick up the discussion and see what we have in common, because Africans are, after all, where humanity came from, and I hope the future of humanity will come from too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Glenn. That was brilliant. I loved that talk.
Thank you.
Let us know if you have any questions for Glenn. I will be happy to ask him. But first of all, I just want to say that was really powerful.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, you can see how excited I am. I know, Suzanne, how excited you are about this. You know, you wouldn't put all the work that you do into IGDA. It's not the big bucks, shall we say? But I really do believe that you know, the world is facing a crisis, and how many people go off to work every day and are one person during the daylight hours, and then at night, you know, they're like, oh my God, look at what's happening on the planet. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. You know, you can be your authentic self all the time. And I think that, you know, being in the game industry, it attracts people who are so passionate about what we do. And all I'm saying is, if we can nudge some of that to make the world a better space, can you imagine the cumulative effect that that will have on the planet, and veer us away from this imminent disaster, this environmental catastrophe that is unfolding, you know, on our watch?
Oh, absolutely. Games have so much power to change, to create change, and help people see things differently. That's what I love about games, is that not only can it change behavior, change thoughts, but, you know, just to help people to get a different perspective on things.
Completely. It's all about empathy. It really is. It's, you know, we can have big philosophical conversations, but ultimately we know, whether it's design thinking or whatever, it's really about, you know, diversity. I mean, any of these big things we can distill down, and I guess our discussions would then always resonate around this one big idea, and that is, yes, I can put you in somebody else's shoes, and I can make you feel and experience the world as they experience them. And games, as you say, are such a beautiful way. What would you do in this environment? What would you do? Oh, this, or that. Oh, well, you see where that ended up. Okay, come back, try again, fail safely. Well, I mean, these are the things we know how to do, and we do every day.
Well, thank you so very much, Glenn. Our next talk is actually about a game where they're going to let us know about the mythology of Nigeria through gameplay. So stick around, everyone, and thank you so much, Glenn.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you to IGDA. Really appreciate it and looking forward to many more conversations and many more partnerships. So thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your sessions and we'll see you on the other side.
Right.
Cheers.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited. We get to see and hear some information about the wild kingdoms with Bukola and Tunde, and it's going to be amazing. So, take it away.
Thanks, Susanna. Hi, my name is Bukola Akingbade, and I'm the founder and CEO of Kucheza Gaming. Today, we'll be talking to you a little bit about the Wild Kingdoms. Kucheza Gaming is a video games and esports company based in Lagos, Nigeria. We focus on game development and games in education. Tunde, would you like to do a quick introduction, please?
Yep, certainly. I'm Tunde Olatunji. I'm based in London, and I'm the author of the Wild Kingdom stories on which the games are based, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Great. Just to kind of start, so we have a short video to show, but just to give some context. So the Wild Kingdoms is a 2D adventure game based on Yoruba mythology. And Yoruba essentially is like a West African ethnic group, about 40 million to 50 million across the world. And so the game is based on the essence of that culture, which is where I am from and where Tunde also is from. So I'll cue the video to play to just kind of give you a brief background about the game and what we've done so far. Right. So we started the journey, I suppose, trying to answer a question of how might we introduce the beautiful elements of Yoruba culture into a way that is fun for the new generation of kids and teens that we have across the world. And so that was the quest that we're on as a company to try to solve that. So the Wild Kingdoms is our first game development project, and it's been a real journey. So I'm going to as Tunde mentioned, he is the author of the series of books around the Wild Kingdoms. So I'm going to cue in today to talk a little bit about that. Tell us a bit about the worlds, the universe of the Wild Kingdoms, Tunde.
Sure. So as Buki said, the Yoruba mythology, we have a pantheon of deities. So there are many hundreds. I don't think anyone seems to know the accurate number. I've tried to find out, but anywhere from, upwards of 600, but many deities. And effectively, both in the story terms of the Wild Kingdoms books that I've been writing, but I think also in general, most stories start with, where did we come from? Like, how was the world created? And that's the origin point of the Wild Kingdom series of stories, is that how the Orisha came into existence and from the Orisha how mankind came to existence. And really, as the clip shows, they manage the affairs of mankind from yesterday, today, and tomorrow. What the stories do is follow that sequence through. Effectively, is that we look at the Orisha yesterday, as in the ancient past, today as in contemporary, and then also what might happen in the future. And part of what the game explores, which we'll come on to, is, I suppose, a slice in time for these characters.
Fantastic. Yes, the culture is actually quite interesting. So your point about how it all started, and I know if we start there, we probably wouldn't finish this talk.
Sure.
So I know you grew up in the UK. Can you kind of give some context to how you got into this world of the Yoruba Kingdom?
Sure. So as Buki said, so briefly, my background is I grew up in the United Kingdom with a white foster family, so they're British. Very different culture. I grew up in a small county called Norfolk. Myself and my brother, I think, were the only two black kids at school. So I've grown up entirely, my entire life in that kind of environment, surrounded by mostly European and white people. And when I was 19, social workers got in touch with me. They got in touch every year, and there would always be a question every single year, more or less, which is, do you want us to try and contact, your birth family? And we always said yes. And as years go by, you imagine that nothing ever happens. One year, miraculously, something did happen, and they actually said, "Oh, look, we've discovered a brother and sister. They live in London. Do you want to meet them?" I met an uncle from Nigeria who happened to sort of be there and come over. And to cut a long story short, ended up some months later in Nigeria for the first time, meeting birth family that treated me like it was the second coming or something. Just in terms of, for me, it was a bit overwhelming, simply because the Yoruba culture is very, very different, as Buki will know. It's very effusive, it's very rich. There'll be songs, there'll be praises, oriki, this kind of thing. And I'd grown up in an entirely white environment where it's just not the way, people tend not to sing as much just spontaneously because they're happy. So my route into the stories, kind of interestingly, was probably through that experience in Nigeria for the first time at 19. And I'm now 51, fascinated and in love with it ever since. And so as a storyteller that grew up with Star Wars, the Mahabharata, those kind of things, just having access to these stories just meant that, okay, look, I have to try to do something as much for myself as anything, if I'm honest, to start with, just as much as wanting to kind of connect with, this culture that I haven't grown up with.
Fantastic. A lot of what you said speaks to, I suppose, a sense of identity. And part of this, in terms of the originality of these stories and the characters we have in the game, from Obatala to Shango to Ogun, and we'll come to that in a few minutes. But first, maybe why for us in doing the game, the sense of identity, why is that important, obviously, in like global storytelling or folklore, from your perspective?
Sure. So I guess a couple of reasons. Most of us, so I'm a fair bit older than you, because I grew up mostly, I suppose, with TV and games. It's not that we didn't have games, but they weren't probably as sophisticated as they are now, let's say, in terms of interaction, design, fidelity of resolution, a whole bunch of other things. And so your way of connecting with stories at that point was through, I guess, what would have been more of a broadcast medium. And that's fine. But what that can mean some of the time is that unless you get the kind of stories that resonate with you, I didn't grow up with a single story in which, for example, even a minority of the characters were black. There were just no black characters in anything that I grew up with for the most part. The story that had the most impact on me as a kid, growing up in a strange kind of way, was actually, one of them was the Mahabharata, because I watched the TV adaptation of it. And, there were all these people that weren't white, and, they had this rich inner life and this rich emotional life and, a whole bunch of other things. But otherwise, mostly I didn't actually have any of those kind of opportunities. I think why games are important, so to address the question more directly, is that you can, through that storytelling, tell a diverse group of stories, which I think the gaming industry, does a really interesting kind of job with. But what you can also do, I guess, is you can immerse yourself in those stories because you actually are the characters. You play the characters. That's very different from watching, a character do something on screen where you're not the character. In games, I suppose the suspension of belief is that I am that character as I play the game and navigate that world. It's important simply because if we think of not just the Yoruba culture, but other cultures in sub-Saharan Africa, there are a whole bunch of stories that are not really being told, not just for us, but also for people that are not us, that can realize actually the connections are far greater than they think, and that we have always historically had some of the same dreams, aspirations, challenges that other parts of the world. And that's why I think what both Kucheza is doing and gaming in general, for the kinds of things that we've talked about, that's why it's significant, because we can affect ultimately hundreds of millions of children to get them to understand that there are these links there, that our cultures are not so different from their own.
Fantastic. I think that's a great point, that there's more that unites us technically than divides us, actually. I think is the essence. And yeah, from a gaming perspective, the whole role-playing element is quite interesting. And so as we kind of get a little bit more into the game now and the characters, could you shed some light a little bit about the Orishas, the aspects of the Yoruba culture, the proverbs? You mentioned Orikis earlier. Can you just please shed some light on that?
Sure. So I guess in a nutshell, so the characters that are deities. So there's an overall deity that would be the closest, let's say, to a Christian god, Olodumare or Olorun, many different names. And forgive me, those that are watching that speak Yoruba fluently, because my pronunciations with the tonal marks are not great, something I definitely need to work on. So we have that. And then there are a pantheon of effectively Olorun's children. And there are, as I said earlier, many hundreds of them. And they are the main characters that populate our game. We focus on the ones that probably tend to be better known. So Ogun, Shongo, Babuluaye, Oya, Olokun, etc. And they will all have their portfolios or things they manage. So one will be god of iron and warfare. There'll be, lightning, the things that, one may get in Greek culture, Norse culture, a whole bunch of other cultures. And that goes to the point about, the similarities. What's interesting, I guess, about the Orisha is, aside from just their names, they all tend to have songs associated with them, instruments, animals associated with them, colors, and then just the amazing names like, Obatala, which, translates literally as the king of the white cloth, which is just a great name. So we have these kind of amazing linguistic richness as well that we can play with. And then visually how we've interpreted that means that the characters within the game will look very, very different than anything anyone has seen before. Unless you have some experience of Yoruba culture, you will not see characters like this in anybody else's game.
Fantastic. And just in terms of, from a Yoruba culture perspective, the layered nature of the language is one of the things that you kind of touched on a bit with the proverbs, that it has deeper meaning, literal meaning. It's quite a complex type of language, Yoruba.
Yeah, so again, and I caveat this, for everyone watching with that, I'm certainly not an expert on the language. That's pretty clear. You tell that from my pronunciations, but I've studied it at least a little, or attempted to at SOAS and some other places. And the thing that's interesting is, firstly, it's a liturgical language, which means that effectively the language is tied to the mythology and the religion. Why is that important? It's important because, unlike, let's say, maybe English, that what you have there is that most things in Yoruba language are going to relate to the deities and the Orisha at one level. I suppose the everyday usage of it may have fallen off, but speaking to Yoruba scholars, which I've definitely done in terms of preparation for the writing, it's pretty clear that a lot of things in everyday phrases will relate to a proverb, and the proverb itself will relate to, either something called an oriki or something, or an odu, which is a sort of a verse that's used religiously that relates to the Orisha. And so it means that effectively that kind of, I suppose, worldview is shaped by the Orisha and the belief in those, and then that permeates through the language. So it means you have this very rich layered language where there are songs, there's poetry, there's verses, there's phrases, there's sayings, and they all essentially are kind of, the thing that binds them together is this pantheon of deities and the responsibilities that the deity has to to mankind, or these pantheon of deities to mankind, but also the responsibilities that we have both to each other as humans, but also to this wider chain that links us to our ancestors and links us to God ultimately. And so that gives the language some immense depth, which on the one hand, it's fascinating, there's no question, the richness. It does make it, though, very complicated and dense. And so one of the challenges is and I think in a game book, you'll know this, will be able to talk to this more than I can, how does that relate to modern Nigerians growing up who aren't going to necessarily, let's say at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, be aware of all of that depth, but you want them to have a root in, but at some point get more out of the fact that their language has this depth and this richness, which they just are not necessarily aware of. And that includes adults, by the way, who just might not be aware of all of the depth and the detail of the language.
I think that's a great point. And it's also at the heart of, obviously, why we're at this point with the project. It's one of those things that we really want to, it's a layer of entertainment, introducing new audiences to the richness of the culture in a way that, it's close enough to them to be able to start to understand and explore. I think that's what's really, really fascinating about the project. I've learned a lot actually being on this project. I do speak the language. It is very layered and extremely complex. I learn every day actually, the new things in the language. But I think for me, success in the game, when it is released, would be to, obviously, I would love my kids to be able to play, to kind of understand and see themselves in a bit of their culture, but also beyond that, like you mentioned, with all other cultures, for other kids and other adults also to be able to kind of share this, have this shared experience with Yoruba culture across board. But for you, today, what would success be for this kind of game for you?
Yes, a very good question. And I'm just looking at, it's interesting, I'm looking at the answers that I sort of already thought about as we discussed what kinds of things might come up in this. And I suppose I reflected on it. I think ultimately success is, I suppose, at the level that you said in terms of layers, entertainment. One always wants an engaged audience, right? It's for sure. There's no question about that. But I think the wider goal for me would probably be, and to the extent that it's my goal, you know, sort of our goal as a team, is that we have this amazingly rich and diverse culture. And the biggest goal and contribution we could make is that it is authentic in terms of the way that we represent ourselves, and that we feel some pride and think, okay, we have actually done a good job. We are satisfied with that. That's probably goal number one. And then beyond that, that it can touch some people that both Yoruba and non-Yoruba alike to look at our culture and either find, you know, surprise, intrigue, or delight from it. That would be enough, because if it does that, what happens afterwards, you know, who knows? But just this idea that people can find something surprising or intriguing about our culture would be a great thing. And that, I guess, in doing that, it's not, I wouldn't use the word elevate our culture, because I think our cultures are already extremely elevated, but it's just this idea that maybe for some people in other parts of the world to look upon, you know, when they hear the name Nigeria or Yoruba culture a little differently, to see that there are these layers and richness and depth to it that they might not have thought about. In the same way that, let's say that if we were having a conversation about music, and you say, okay, all over the world, Afro beats, people know it, and they think of it as a certain thing, and, you know, it's energetic, I mean, culture, richness, people resonate with it. A little bit of that, in the sense that people think, Nigeria, right, they have these amazing stories, they have this, you know, pantheon of deities. Something like that would be wonderful.
Oh wow, that's really true. You know, that we're authentic. You know, that we keep the story credible, and we represent the culture appropriately in what we do. I totally agree. And obviously, the delight or the surprise of the user or the player would be great, as well as a layered thing. And you're right, just in music, Afrobeat is repping all that, and it will be great to have, you know, a story well told in the games industry from Yoruba, from West Africa as well. From our perspective, that would be really, really cool. I know the world, and obviously when we're talking about the Wild Kingdoms, it's a whole universe. It's not just, you know, we've spoken about the books a bit, the game a bit, but I know it is much broader than that in terms of how we're thinking about the universe of the Wild Kingdoms. Could you shed a bit more light on some of the other projects related to the Wild Kingdoms?
Yeah, sure. So as I said earlier, it's been an obsession of mine probably for sometimes longer than is healthy, so decades. But the couple of things that we're working on at the moment are audio dramas. So one is an audio drama that places the Orisha in contemporary London, and it gives them the problem that they're trapped, they're not able to get out of the London, and that it really examines what happens when none of the rules that they had had previously to each other and to mankind are there. How do they then respond? You know, are they actually a family or not? And I suppose if it was the pitch and I was in an elevator, you could say it's American gods, but just based around Nigerian deities set in London. It's much more than that, but this is effectively, and it looks at the power dynamics, you know, and a whole bunch of other things in terms of the Orisha. And that story will be told as 15-minute audio dramas, 12 parts, which we'll bring out towards the end of next year. And prior to that, we have a project called Strange Cases, which is exploring the journey of two detectives in London as they search for evidence of the existence of the Orisha. And the idea is that these two worlds come together so that we have the point of view of the Orisha being trapped in London and how that plays out in their family drama. And then prior to that, we set it up with some evidence of some change within London and these two characters as they journey, you know, to find the evidence towards it. So it is, I suppose, X-Files meets American Gods, if you were putting it that way. And then these two worlds will at some point, you know, mesh and merge. And they'll all be told as 15-minute audio dramas. and audio because you can tell something on massive scale. And I guess where the game world comes into it is, as you said, Bookie, we're creating a entire universe of, you know, the Wild Kingdoms, because these stories are big enough. And, you know, I don't take credit on the story sense because that's hundreds of years of Yoruba culture, right? My thing is just operating a particular lens and, you know, trying to refract some of those a particular way.
Fantastic. I'm really, really looking forward to the audio stories. I've had to listen to some of them, so I'm sure they'll be great. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to, obviously, we're on the same team.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to have you. And just to round off, I'm just going to show the video one last time, and then that will call it a day. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Bookie.
Take care.
Thank you so much, Kunde. That
Many
you're
thanks.
Thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to go and read your stories. I cannot wait to play the game.
Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And have a lovely day.
You
And bye-bye,
too.
Natasha.
Hi, everyone. It is so good to see you. I am so excited about our next talk. Niambura Warangimi is going to be talking about her game, her project, this amazing world that she is creating. So, off to you, Niambura.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you to International Game Developers Association for inviting me for this. Hello, everyone. Hello, my cohort. We haven't met in person, but it's just been really exciting seeing all of you and seeing what has happened. So today I will be presenting really when it comes to game development, game design, there's a lot of time spent in the sexy technological exploration part. But before all of that happens, there's a lot that goes into the world building, to uncovering the stories and seeing in building the world and the stories that are made, how does the gameplay develop? So today I will take you through this VR spatial experience gameplay called The Ground Screams to Whisper. And one thing I just want to let you know that the images in this presentation form the mood board. So also take your time and let them sink in. A lot of it has to deal with cosmology, cultural cosmology, astronomy, and land, and our link to land and our lineage and all of that. So that really comes through the different types of photos, images that I'm choosing that are developing the mood board. So The Ground Screams to Whisper is in development phase, just to let you know. We're still working through that and then going to go into prototyping very soon. So The Ground Screams to Whisper is really about rewriting women into independence myth making through folklore and history. Why this is really important to myself as Nyambura Waringe and founder and creative director of Akoya & Company is that a lot of the work that we are interested in doing, that I am putting my name to and putting the energy of the company behind, is really around excavating stories that we usually don't hear, and particularly about women and their erasure in different sectors of life. And so this is a really great experience that brings the independent struggle, a very important and vital aspect of our history as Kenya, and very much linked to plantation culture that came through British colonialism. And we really at Akoya & Company, the mantra is that we imagine radically. For us, the function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It's to imagine what is possible. And this is a quote by the great late Bell Hooks. And that becomes kind of our North Star with everything that we do. And I've been working in this for about over 20 years, through theater, through cinema, through visual arts, and now really bringing it all to bear into creating special experiences and games, and creating experiences that allow us to think through different variations of game design. So welcome. So the journey we'll take is that we will explore stories we don't get to tell. And a big aspect of it is about the necessary excavations and collaborations that have taken place to bring to life The Ground Screams to Whisper. And then we'll kind of go into this kind of first iteration of the synthesis into game design. So I'd like to introduce you to The Ground Screams to Whisper, an Afro-Gothic immersive experience that allows audiences to experience the triumph of being a female freedom fighter and relive the often erased stories of shaping Kenya's independence struggle and post-colonial history. The Ground Screams to Whisper really is, as I've said before, around land and lineage. And the one thing I want you to really take in with this, this is stock footage, stock images, is unlike a lot of what you see about Africa, that usually has a savanna, has the lions, has the tropical sun and sunsets. This is a story about coffee plantations that are in the highlands. When the British imperial project got into Africa and Kenya became a colony, is that the highlands where the people from whom the stories are, and this is a Kikuyu community, were misty, there's thick forests, very rich land. So that is also a very important aspect of the visuals that you will see that are an important part of the gameplay too. It looks at the land from this perspective of the plantation, and also looks at lineage, because as you'll get to know the characters that I'll present to you, each of them have a different lineage from the clans that they do come from, and the powers or skills that they do possess that are then taken up by the colonial masters at that point in time, British Empire, to fuel the coffee industry that we have to date. I'm having coffee right now, and having learned all of this, I have a very different relationship to coffee and tea and all of the different plantation cultures that we've taken on as an independent republic because of the stories that that are the beginning of these. Another aspect is Afro-Gothic storytelling motifs. And a lot of this work takes place at night. because this is the one time the women are able to have rest. And that's a very important thing, particularly in capitalist culture. The notion that you do not rest is integral to its survival. You do not rest, you do not imagine, you do not think. And what's really important is that when we're looking up, they're often lying on the ground and they're looking up at the stars in the sky and the stories that the stars will tell. And I'll just get into it in a little bit. And I'll read for you an excerpt. And that's part of the research that's really important in understanding how do these stars culturally code to us. As we've always learned through Western culture, we've had, about Planitis, which actually features in this. But there is a different story around Planitis. And another aspect to this, when you look at Afro-Gothic, is it is a ghost story, inevitably. It is about the land of the living, the land of the in-between, and the land of the ancestors, and how we get to cross over. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And finally, it's also, we're looking at Eastern and Southern African cosmologies. Now, I've been, as I've said, working at this and creating stories, whether as a producer, consultant in the development process, whether documentary, all of that. It's always been important to do research. And, there's a Google research and you do all of that and kind of make it through. There's always a researcher on board. But I think after moving to Kenya about 10 years ago to start this company, Akoya and Company, and to imagine radically through the different types of stories that I wanted to tell, as I'd been telling other stories for so long, was the dearth of information on Africa, African cosmologies, African themes. A lot was missing. It's in the academies, not as accessible, in ways that I had not experienced. And I think this is an experience, particularly, I would think, within indigenous cultures of the global north, where the imperial project also leads to erasure of embodied experiences that are part of the culture, that have supported the culture, and an understanding of the culture, not from a Western lens. So it's really been fascinating. And that's why the collaborations for this are so important in developing and understanding the story that will then build a world that will then influence the gameplay. So one of the places that that collaborations are forming is with the African Astronomical Society and the South African Astronomical Observatory. And I just want to read to you. What you're seeing is a cluster of stars. And the question is, and this is from an excerpt from their book, African Star Lore. Is it Isilimela or is it Planitis? And this is a story of Isilimela, just like in Western mythology and Western astronomy and astrology, and which is from Greek and Roman history, is that it's called Planitis. We've come to learn of it as Planitis, but is it called Isilimela? So Isilimela dies and is not seen. It is not seen in winter. And at last, when the winter is coming to an end, it begins to appear. One of its stars is first, and then three, until going on increasing, it becomes a cluster of stars and is perfectly clear when the sun is about to rise. And we say Isilimela is renewed and the year is renewed. And so we begin to dig. Now, that's a very important aspect in terms of telling time, telling seasons, telling time. Is it time to plant? What time is it? If we start to dig, this is how we're able to say now we're starting a season of planting and therefore harvest. And this is how we mark time, by also telling it by the stars. And it's a very important aspect because all of this with the imperial project, with colonization, with imperialism being linked directly to agriculture and the land that was possessed by the Kikuyu people at that time, and in Kenya in general, that is done away with, and different traditions and cultures are put in place that are only legible to the Western culture and does not allow for the culture that was already there. And this is one of my very exciting ways that I'm starting to rediscover how to read the sky in a different way. And this lends a lot to the storytelling. So an important aspect of the game is that there's a time cap on it. So can you find a way to freedom before the next retrograde? And that's very important because the story of the game is that Riziki is a writer who goes to a former coffee plantation. And while she's there, she uproots an olive tree, which is the veil between the world of the living and the in-between worlds. She breaks it. Now, in breaking this world, her ancestors come to her, the women from the in-between. And that's Mukami, Nyawera, and Muthoni, and I'll tell you more about them a little bit later. But they each have their own motives. And so she must repair the rupture. And if she doesn't repair the rupture, she'll remain trapped in the in-between world with the rest of the souls. So can she rescue them all, or will she remain trapped with them forever? And that is the backstory to some extent of how we enter the game and how we understand how different aspects of the game will play. And by picking different characters, we'll have different experiences of this game, which is about freedom. So a little bit of a historical background. The Ground Screams to Whisper really looks at how the historical excavation and archive making around this type of stories. And you're probably wondering, how do we write women into independence? Like, they were there. They were. Physically, they were there. Depending on who you're talking to, they're either rioting or revolting. But because of the system that came, which was a British system of life that is Victorian, and also the gender system too, women were erased and eluded out of this stories. So first, let us talk about the story of the land, who tilled and who owned. The image that you're looking at is this drawing of a map of the area that is called Karen, and it was a former coffee plantation. Now, this land has various stories of ownership that only relates to the white people. So Karen Blixen, she's given to it by the governor of Nairobi at that point in time, and then she bequeathed it back to the people, which in and of itself is highly problematic. It was never their land to give away. Now, when they had these coffee plantations, and understanding the stories of the colonists is that the colonists were brought and they came here and they settled. Some were part of a reward for World War I and II. And so the men came and they came to set up families. One thing about Kenya in particular, very much like South Africa, we're meant to be a settler colony. We were a settler colony, which is a little bit different from the rest. So we were going to be, so the land that you see had other people, and this were the Kikuyu people who lived on this land. But at this point in time, the colonists are being brought in and, drawing the maps of their land and, being told, we're now part of the empire, and empire needs coffee. And that's part of the economic activity and a capitalist activity, because that was around the whole notion of imperialism is also access to resources. And what happens is this land needs people to till it. And what we learn about this land that needs people to till is that a lot of the people who end up tilling the land were the Africans, the people who actually owned the land. But more importantly, women were a very important aspect of this, because women were also the agriculturalists. And that's something that's also very different. And who gets to till and who gets to own the land, again, is also very different. So the background around this is really, as I said, looking at the land and the links to the land. And one thing that's really important, and why this story is also very important to me, is I think I live to the left side of this former coffee plantation, because it is now a suburb, and it is now where all of us live in the independent Republic of Kenya. But the land has stories, and while now Africans do own the land, the stories are yet to be excavated. And that's why I really love developing this story and gameplay, the ground screams to whisper. So the making of the colonial village and for the Kikuyu is very important. I was looking for images, and this is, again, why it's important to work with historical collaborators. For me right now, I'm exploring a partnership with the headstrong historian. Her name is Chalti Maina. And I'll tell you what we've been talking about, particularly when it comes to the later section of this presentation, around methodology of how we will continue to conduct the research so that there's some sense of veracity and to really create gameplay that's actually interesting. It's fact-based, but even if we fictionalize it, that will go to the next level. So making of the colonial village is that part of it was they needed to clear the Kikuyu out of the land and put them in colonial villages, and they had hat taxes that they needed to pay. And this hat taxes could be paid with a pound, not with their currency that was there before. And this is also an important image. This is part of imperial reckoning. This is where we learn even more around the separation and how come women formed a larger part of the labor force from time to time, because men would be rounded up and taken away. And I'll read something for you from the African Feminist Forum around really also, because of this Victorian British gendered idea, how women and women's struggle was misrepresented. So as I said from before, were the women rioting, were they revolting? And that's an aspect of the colonial narratives. This one's from Nigeria. So there's more rioting in Nigeria, mob attacks, loyal chief, 49 deaths this month. And really what these colonial narratives do is that they also enforce a certain colonial administration, and that became more and more aggressive, as you've seen in the picture prior to this. And they become more aggressive. They're allowing, even by the British public, for more violence, because this is how this is reported. They're rioting. To riot is to be unruly, is to disrupt the order. And the order is colonial, it's British, it's imperial. But to revolt is to take on and refuse to be subjugated, to be exploited. And that was also problematic between what was happening on the ground in what was known as a colony of Kenya and what was being reported, and how that then lent into laws that became labor ordinances that allowed forced labor. Also movement ordinances, which we had a system, it's called the Kipande system, where you had like a plaque where it's written in English, what your name is, whether you're a good worker or not. So you have to understand how depraved the system is and what happens. And as a result of it, why people did revolt, why people did riot. And it's really a retelling of a narrative and a rewriting, as I've said, of women into this narrative, because the independence narrative in Kenya very much is led by men. I think all of us in some way can name Jomo Kenyatta. But there's a very interesting figure called Harry Thuku, who was supported by women that I will get to. So this is where it's very interesting, because, as I said before, the women were told that, they didn't really, it was an infantilization of women and not understanding how deeply and truly they participated in the independence struggle. And this becomes my ground zero for this story. So I will read to you from the African Feminist Forum about Kikuyu women in the Thuku revolt. So you see, we're calling it a revolt. Well, the colonial narrative was that it was a riot, so just unruly women. There has been considerable scholarly focus on the nature of women's participation in nationalist struggles. The importance of this focus is to recognize women's political agency and not relegate women to supporting roles in what tend to be understood as men's political struggles. The colonial literature has presented two caricatures of African women's involvement in nationalist struggles. Women as ignorant peasants, threatened into feeding, resistance fighters, or urban prostitutes, stripped of tribal affiliation with nothing to lose. The reality is, however, more complex. So we're looking at, along with men, Kikuyu women were adversely affected by colonial legislation depriving them of land, particularly as women performed most of the agricultural labor for the overpopulated reserves on which they lived, and were often used as seasonal workers on coffee plantations too. Being forced to perform this communal labor and to pay taxes according to the laws of 1910 and 1934 greatly troubled women. Sorry, give me 1 second. So you have to understand this is, it's something that has been going on for a while. So the women's revolt is then started at the arrest of Harry Thuku, who is the founders of the Young Kikuyu Association in 1921. And he was very outspoken. So what these women do is they have also had the government double the poll taxes. They have a reduction in African wages, oppression by the tribal police, and forced labor of women and children especially. So as you can see, this starts to break apart even the gender division of labor, but this now has gotten to a point where this is immoral. It does not fit in within the morality of this tribe. So this last grievance around children's labor and forced labor was what led the women to support Harry Thuku. And so these women refused to pay taxes, and they have, in 1922, there's a general strike. While only 150 women attended, the crowd was then requested to disperse. The women became angry because they felt the men were capitulating to the authorities. So in an act of traditional symbolism, one of the women in the crowd pulled up the skirt above her shoulders while at the same time ululating and heaping verbal scorn on the men, implying that women would do what the men should have. Others followed. And this symbolism is effective in taunting the men and signaling the women's repudiation of their authority and the women's challenge, and the sound of the ululation stopped the larger crowd from dispersing. In the ensuing agitation, the crowd lunged forward, the people opened fire, and 21 people, 4 women, were killed. Many others were injured. So while this is considered, it was short-lived, it really didn't last. But what's really important is that in 1947-48, there's what they call the revolt of the women also. And this is how it, as I said, it's very important to understand how the changes in society, the continual stripping away of rights and exploitation leads to this. And when this revolt happens in 1947 and 48 in what they call Fort Hall, has always been called Muranga here, the district commissioner, who is British, found it impossible to believe that women had acted on their own and concluded that they must have been spurred on by a clique of young urban men intent on sabotaging their administration. His opinion was common among Europeans. Such ventures into the political arena by Kikuyu women are all the more remarkable because, as a group, women in Kenya had largely been excluded from modern education and from any formal participation in the colonial political system. They confronted an informal coalition of African and British male attitudes. And it goes on, and as of 1930, what they do is they split and form the Mumbi Central Administration, where Kikuyu women showed that they had a strong political voice. And one Mobi in Kikuyu culture, Kikuyu folklore, Kikuyu origin myth story is the Mobi is the mother and Kikuyu is the father. The origin story is that Kikuyu and Mobi then have 9 daughters who make the 9 clans of the Kikuyu cultural community, ethnic group, or tribe. And so they then take the name of their foremother and start their own association. So as I said, the whole notion of erasing women does also happen because women did not receive the formal education that men did. And in them receiving that education, they were able to agitate for independence. And this is where, as I said, women were excluded from this, so they don't participate, so we don't see them, but they're very much at the forefront of the independence struggle. And this became my ground zero for this story, to rewrite them and for them to participate in this myth making, and for them to become even more rooted in our consciousness through different fictional narratives that are experienced through different types of technological platforms, VR, special experiences, and everything else. So now we'll go into how I built the world and how I developed the experience. So with all this historical uncovering, also working with Child Tayana Maina, which in our relationship as we are developing this story, we collaborate in the sense of I do some research and write a story around it. So I've done a lot of research in the African, in different journals on African colonial history, African history, and in order to build the world of the experience and the living world, the in-between world, even understanding the totem, which is the olive tree sapling, where apparently in this research that I did that looks at important plants that are part of rites and ritual, that the olive tree sapling, unlike the one that I think we know a lot along the Mediterranean, where there's an olive and we have olives and we eat olives, but this was actually used for black paint. I'd never known this, so it's as I said, this is also a very exciting process for me. And then you also have the realm of ancestors, which is an understanding that in Kikuyu culture, there's no sense of heaven and hell. When you die, you become an ancestor. And these women are all murdered on the coffee plantation. And their murder means that they don't receive the rites and rituals to cross over and become ancestors. And that's why in this fantasy, in the world that I built, they're stuck to the house, they're stuck to the living world in some way, in this in-between world, and they're waiting to cross over. And I'll get into some of the characters and their motivations in doing this research on spirituality, labor, rites and rituals through song. It has been a fascinating experience. So as in the introduction, you have Riziki, I call her the dreamer. And I in this, I was using really more drawn work to inspire me, not necessarily looking at real people. So this again are stock images of the things that were interesting to me about the characters. So Riziki goes there to finish her novel. She's a writer, aspiring writer. So that's our world before we enter the world of the game. And her task is to finish the novel, but she raptures time and she must repair the veil. And how is she going to do this? And this is why a lot of the historical information is important. She's going to do this by learning about the stars. Therefore, we'll learn about the colonial ordinances and we'll learn about the rites and rituals as we start to interact with the game. And will she heal time or not? We'll know if you complete the game. There's Mukami, I call her the shapeshifter. And why she's a shapeshifter is because part of my research also found that this Kikuyu culture, and I'm not a complete historian, I work with a historian. And one of the things that we realize is there's a ritual that goes around the Mugumo tree, and you can change gender. And the Mugumo tree is the sacred tree. And and it links up to Kikuyu cosmology, Kikuyu spirituality. It's important. It's very important. It's sacred. And so one of the aspects around fluidity, and then knowing that this exists, and I've seen it in different historical texts, but then growing up Kikuyu, well, I am from the city, so city, and I'm not as rural, or rather I don't live where we're from, is that there isn't any allowance for that for gender fluid people within the different aspects, because of different religions. You're looking at Presbyterianism, Catholicism, African Inland Church. So these are the different types of religions that are part of it, but it doesn't continue. And I never heard of it or even experienced any talk of it until I read about it. But if this could exist, and that has been erased, what would be interesting around understanding a character who could change that? And because Mukami is an older character, she also is the keeper of the lore and the keeper of the traditions, the culture, the rites and rituals while they're within on the plantation where they've been forced to work. We have Nyawera the Reaper, and Nyawera is she's a woman who did not believe that she would be taken, and in that is that she's actually very good at farming. She's the best, so to speak, but she couldn't, she was weaning, and that's an aspect of her having a child. She was weaning, she didn't think that she needed to go, but that's the aspect of forced labor. It doesn't matter. And because it doesn't matter, how does that change the person? Nyawera is, for me, one of the characters who has kept very much to Kikuyu tradition. She's done the right thing. She's the first wife, she's gotten married, she's having children, and now she's being ripped away from her family. And really and I think that's something that people don't understand, how this occupation, this colonization, this exploitation really did change how family functioned. And finally, we have Muthoni. She's a rebel, she's the youngest. And one thing that we explore with her, because she's taken before she is initiated into the culture, and her and Mukami, who's the older one, form a deeper bond. So those are some of the questions that between Chao and I, where we're looking at how do the solidarities and relationships between people form. This is actually a conversation we had 2 days ago, and it was very exciting because I can actually talk about it here. And with these characters being women, and Mukami being a healer, but in terms of the notions of witchcraft that are crafted specifically against African cosmology, African spirituality, what does that mean? And so that's part of the story, and part of how I'm thinking through the world in order to create the game design and what aspects we get to see. So that's about the characters. The visual aesthetics, as you realize, I'm looking at really animation, more animation than and also really, because this is, I said, it's a ghost story. For me, it also explores different cosmologies. I really want to sit in that realm of magical realism and to reflect the environment. There is a sense of a muted palette because of the space that the place and the location, which is in the highlands, and there's mist and there's fog and all of that is a part of it. And it's green, and the greens change as the plants germinate and as they as the coffee ripens. So when the coffee bean starts, it's a green, it's in this light to deep green, but then there's a vibrance that emerges and it becomes red. And that's also symbolic, a little bit on the nose, in terms of the blood, the fear, and all of that has happened there. But I found that would be very interesting for the comparison of the palette, the color palette of the space, where we have a sense of mutedness in the color, and then kind of this pops of vibrance that come from the coffee beans. In terms of the experience, as I said, it really is looking at how to make a game that is multi-platform and location-based. It's important that it just doesn't live in a headset. it's important that it lives across different platforms. And that's why this whole development and world building is to gather as much information and see in different forms of different gameplays how those exist. Like what would happen in in the headset, it being switched off, and all of that is very different aspect of the story that could go into like on WebXR, or even that is done that we can use our smartphones to experience. So that's also a very important aspect of how we build the world and how we imagine the world and what would go onto which platform. Yes, it's a lot. And when we're looking at the levels of interaction, it's the audience holds a lot of the weight. They get to interact with objects and text to activate the worlds and cross over from one level to another. And they would have to also, they have the notion of there's a time limit, as I said, like you must complete the actions in each world before the mists roll in. But at the same time, I think this, the different levels of interactivity that I'm playing with, how would the audience know, like if those things, different aspects pop up, the different cues can pop up, and that will allow people to start to say, okay, if I interact with this aspect of the screen, this object, this, that, and the other, they're starting to see more like either like ordinances come up or tools. For example, if you end up picking the character Nyawera, you'll be more linked to agriculture. So you'll be thinking about agriculture and tools and what you till and not and all of that. So the interactivity develops through the audience playing more and really participating and having the mist roll in, them having to go back and teaching themselves through that. So what would start would be with a gameplay mechanics. So you select a character, and I've told you about the different characters. There'll be the different key actions are really around selecting the objects that will activate the points of interest. I'm looking at the build-up, as I've said, around the mists coming in, and also the points of interest are world dependent. So what are the different freedom songs that would show up in Modoni? If you take Modoni's journey, women's ritual dances, which you pick up more if you take on Mukami's journey, colonial labor ordinances that you pick up if you're taking Awere's journey, and then with the secret insurgencies, really it comes through what Riziki is exploring. So those will be the type of points of interests that are world dependent. And as I've told you before, around the different cues, like floating text. So I'm really trying to create a world, particularly with the VR experience, like really create a world in which people have to move and touch, so to speak, and start to have an immersive experience of the world by interacting with it in different ways. So the target audiences, I'll go through this really much faster because I'd really love to get to your questions. As I said, I'm really looking at heritage spaces. I'm looking at web immersive experiences. I'm looking at bringing in people who are history buffs, people who are interested in how new media arts come together and create different learning experiences. And this is, for me, also a very artful project. So I am really excited to explore how much we can push the art, how much we can push the animation. And same about the distribution, as I've said, location-based experiences. Because I am located and I'm working out of Africa, web and mobile is something that is very much integral to our experience of the world around us. And so, whereas I do love the VR experience, but I do feel that I want to link it up to a location-based experience that people would come in and commune together in experiencing this story. So finally, I'll go through the collaborations and the funders, partners. Funders, that's for another presentation. So at the moment, as I said, there's the African Astronomical Society who came and got to meet through the South African Astronomical Observatory, and African Digital Heritage, and looking at Waka Talent Agency. And one thing that that is important is Waka is based in South Africa, and they have a Pan-African roster of actors, and that's where I would really love to draw from, particularly around the voice acting, and maybe even some of the motion capture, depending on how we work on it. We're still in development in kind of figuring out technically and technologically how we'll create all of this. African Digital Heritage, which is run by Charity Minor, and I'll get into a little bit of her work, and really thinking through, these are the partners that are at the development, at the kind of world building phase of this game. So with Charity Minor, she's a consultant and digital heritage specialist. A lot of her work, please find it at headstronghistorian.com, headstronghistorian.com. Charity and myself, we've worked together on different projects, and a lot of them around the archive, like archive making. How do we make an archive where we didn't find one? And that also is, like, there's a project and there's a creative work around it, and there's, you know, how we want to make money and everything else. But after you've done this, where does all this research rest? Where does this research go? For us who go into archives, and that's something that Char really does and we talk about, is you go into this archives and the gaps. So you research to fill in the gaps. Then who do you bequeath this research and this gaps that have helped shape your work, your storytelling, and how you imagine the world, but where else does this go? And we've always talked about not just creating an archive for ourselves, but then gifting this archive. And one of from our conversation that we had this week, I just wanted to go through how we look at this collaboration, and in looking at this collaboration, what methodologies we're thinking of continuously developing to build the world in order to influence the gameplay and the visual aesthetics and everything else. So what we're doing, a lot of it is around oral history and literature, and an understanding of pre-colonial ethnographic historiographies. And that literally is, how are we writing history and how are we making history? Who are we choosing as legitimate versus illegitimate actors, which does come from also a very Western-based understanding of writing history, where there's certain people who are not legitimate, and certain things that are facts and human experience don't make it into how we understand history. So as a digital heritage specialist, as a historian, that's something that she is working to, to work against this type of system, for us to then create work that we can also center the everyday knowledge that we get to see, get to investigate, get to hear about, for us to then create this version of history that either did not exist or talk back to it. So we are questioning legitimacy of research and pushing boundaries around knowledge hierarchies. And this is very exciting for me, because the very work that I do pushes against different types of boundaries, whether be gender, class, sexual orientation, ethnocultural also too, and racialization. That is really important in talking about how we create the stories that we do create. And that's why imagining radically is so important to how I situate the company that I've built, a Korean company, as well as the projects that we do. And the methodology that we're coming up with is really leaning towards the organization of the archive, which is our next step. As I've told you, a lot of the research that we're going into is through the different books, journals, archives like newspapers during that time, is really looking at spirituality, rites and rituals, and agriculture. And particularly, and my choice of a coffee plantation is that it was a very important cash crop But this cash crop also interfered with the nutrition and the health of the community. And that's how we start to find different malnutrition diseases that show up during this time. And with it also, the colonial industrial project of presenting Africans as incapable, unable to feed their own children, and also saying this is why, they need modern medicine. They didn't have a place to farm their own food. So it really is a partnership that we're looking at how research development, world building, and how we create the archives that we're going to then gift to other spaces. So finally, again, my name is Nyambura Warenge. Thank you very much for taking the time with me to learn more about the Ground Screams to Whisper and how I'm, rewriting women into our independence histories from which they've been erased. And also, thank you very much for the invitation, IGDA. And one thing is, to anyone who's listening, or whether you have a company or not, I came to this much later. My background is in screen media, and then I went into visual arts, and I just reached a point where I was like, no, I need to be making immersive work. A long time ago, and now it's a bad word, it was called transmedia work. I really was interested in how do you work with different platforms for the same story and different iterations. So I'd really like to encourage different people who are out there who are like, this is too technical, I can't get into it. There's always a developer for that. But what you will always need is your commitment to telling a really good story. What you can see is some of the organizations that I've worked with in this 20-year career, the Space being the last one. It's a really interesting organization that looks at immersive storytelling and interactive storytelling out of the UK. So thank you very much. You can reach me at akoya.africa, nyambura.akoya.africa, or find all our work at akoya.africa. And don't stop imagining radically. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nyambura. That was such a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. I don't know. I can't see people.
Yeah, I know, it's horrible. You're talking into a camera, but
No, it's like, hi.
the people watching are really interested in what you're discussing. And can you talk a little bit more about the sort of the separation between men and women, the Kikuru, like how were women more on the plantations? Was it more women than men because the men were being taken away?
So this is also a fictional telling. So
Okay.
this is not pure history. So that's one thing. Please don't use this and go and start talking about Kikuyu culture and say that, because it is a fictional telling. It's now really looking at what if this happened and this how they were on this land and everything else. However, that being said, if you have a culture, first, where no one technically owns land, which is very different from Western culture where people own land, and the background is, not background, and the history of it is that they're serfs, they're servants, the people who are not people who have to till the land and do all of that. So then you bring that culture and impose it on another culture where land is for the people and people get to use and till the land and expand the land. But there's no set that can actually be said, this is only my land, which is what they brought. Now, having a culture that is an agrarian, largely agrarian trade culture, and that's something people don't really talk about, is the business, or after planting and harvesting, the business is to sell, right? And Kikuyu women were very much a part of capital production. And that's something that for the British colonial offices, administrations, all like the whole imperial project, it was really difficult because in many cultures, and even in Nigeria, is that women were part of capital production. And that was something that women were never a part of in their culture, right? Women were highly dependent on men. I'm not saying we don't come from a patriarchal culture, but it was very different. Women were not expected to have, mental faculties, all these things. And they then bring it here where the women are agriculturalists. So the very thing that they need is women. So this where also comes the kind of stereotype of the African man being lazy because he did not till the land. But that gender-wise, that is not his work. That is not his job. He has other jobs, right? Within this culture, and that's also it's culture specific. So when we have these coffee plantations, there's labor that is needed. Yes, there was men that were there, but there were a lot of women who were there too. And this is when, at the point where they were taken away from their land. So as I said, this was an area that then became called the White Highlands. And it was a settler colony. So a settler colony, very much like the US, is where people come and take over, and the people who are there before are then forced into often it's non-productive land, or forced then to pay to the administration to be alive based on their currency, not the currency that they had, or the trade system that they had. So now you have to pay these taxes. And the only way to pay the taxes is by being forced to labor. And women were a part of that. Now, where Kikuyu women are it's an interesting dynamic, is that for the women, every culture is literate. Like, you're meant to be literate within the culture, and they were literate. But with the imposition of this different culture, which did not allow women to be literate in their culture, then also created a disproportionate non-representation of women in the political struggle. The land, quote unquote, belongs to the people, and the women attachment and link to the land is because they're the ones who till it, who farm it. It's part of the household. It's how they feed their families. It's how they make money, and their form of money, whether it's a barter trade system, whatever, that then enriches their home. And that is like a woman's job, so to speak, within their culture. So that's the link.
That's really, really interesting. Thank you very much. We've all really enjoyed this talk. It's been beautiful. Your imagery is
Thank you.
beautiful. And thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Wasn't that last talk amazing? I am so grateful to have you here and for another awesome talk about empowering communities. We have Nurhan El Sharif, who is here, and I could not be more grateful. Thank you so much, Nurhan, and take it away.
Thank you, Suzanne. Hey, everyone. I'm Nurhan Sharif. I'm currently senior game developer at Instant Games and a board member and secretary at Global Game Jam. I'm also a community manager at Egypt Game Developers, or EGD. And for 7 years, I have been involved in game dev community work in various ways. The reason I started with community work was because of the way I started in video games. It was basically, I never knew that video games existed in Egypt, where I come from, as an optional career choice. And one day I just heard about this new event called Global Game Jam that's taking place. And with no idea how to make games, I decided to join. And thus my career took off ever since. Since it was very hard for me to start, learn, and progress, and it very much relied on luck and chance, I felt that I wanted to help change that. And thus I have been involved in game dev community work ever since. And today I'm hoping to share my self-learned experience with you guys in hopes that it can help further empower local communities. So a lot of times I think to myself, what a time to be alive. I mean, we can now see lots of indie games going on par, head to head with AAA games. The quality bar for indie games has raised exponentially since indie games started to spread nearly 10 years ago. I mean, just putting a simple poster for a comparison can show as much. However, despite all that, some indie game communities around the world still feel stuck back at that early beginning point in 2008, much like Egypt. And it's hard to compare the indie scene locally where I live to the ones abroad, especially in Japan, Europe, and North America. Over there, they seem to be progressing and growing a whole lot faster on a totally different scale, while the communities here can't seem to be keeping up. While I can only judge for the local indie community here in Egypt, the one I'm in direct contact with, I think it's safe to say that it's the same case for many game communities that's still, blooming and growing in lots of countries like the MENA region and Africa. I suppose the main problem would lie in the limited number of game developers and artists, and how everyone is still trying to learn with no real guide or real senior or teacher to show them the way. While the internet majorly, of course, helps out, there are certain things that only experience can teach, and passing this knowledge on, directly is the fastest way to grow, in my opinion. So how do we help the local industry grow? I suppose the real question is there any way for progressing faster or running faster? Is there a way for us to catch up with the big league? The answer is, of course, relative and largely depends on the individual efforts. With lots of passionate developers and artists emerging every day, but without a proper outlet or place for communication, chances are these people will never meet and will never get the chance to learn from each other or work together. Thus, this is, opportunity lost and high chances of these individuals thinking that they are alone in the industry and wouldn't stand a chance. Might even think it'd be better to pursue other career choices. This is why communities are important and where communities serve best. And by helping the local community grow, you're helping the local industry grow. Okay, so what are ways to help the community grow? Throughout my years, those 7 years, it's safe to say that there are definitive ways of helping it grow. First and foremost is to know what the community lacks. Each local community differs from the other, and thus their needs differ as well. Some communities are more dev dominant, while other communities are artist dominant. So it's important to closely study the local scene, define what it lacks and needs, and determine ways to tackle it. For instance, if you find that the community is dev dominant, maybe try exploring why artists are reluctant to join the scene. Do they need guidance, or on art for games, for example? Can a series of workshops help steer the scene in the right direction, or is there a deeper issue at hand, like they don't want to make games? It's important to take all the needed time in this phase because it helps 100% getting things in the right direction and avoids wasting time. Of course, it goes without saying, don't get trapped in a bubble. It can easily happen, and it can truly mislead everyone. Only looking at the local scene, because while the local scene is still blooming and has so much to learn, you can easily glorify things that are actually just really trivial. While encouragement, of course, is very crucial for progress, it's important not to over-glorify things. With communication with the global communities, you can get feedback from outside that small community bubble and check out the global standards and quality, and try to push them locally. I see this issue everywhere and all the time. There are economic and cultural differences and views about games here and abroad that can't be easily dismissed, especially how gamers and the target game crowd here has different views and concepts about games. Whenever I get to showcase my, let's say, platformer game or top-down games to gamer friends, or in a local game event, I mainly get pointed out that these aren't real games. Or maybe I should try working on, something like Assassin's Creed or God of War. I would try to explain to them how AAA games and indie games are totally different things or different types of games, but my efforts are always futile. It didn't take long to realize that the gap between gamers and indie game developers here is so big. And at this rate, it will just keep getting bigger. For a long while now, indies in the local scene have been, trying to reach out to other indie developers, but what about the gamers too? They're a large part of the community. So you can have a game convention without gamers, right? So you have to involve gamers more. Reaching out to sponsors. So far, with the previous points, you might find yourself sort of, funding these mini events with your own money. But as the community grows, you might find it hard to satisfy its needs with your own wallet. That's why having sponsors is important. Once you have established a good ground or base for the local scene, it will be good enough to attract the suitable sponsors to further invest in the local scene. This will drastically give a very, very fast, push forward. Now, after being able to get, sponsors, it will be easier to organize events. It's never easy to organize events. The type of events largely depends on the local community needs. Do people need to communicate better? So maybe have more game jams. Are they more interested in showcasing their work? So maybe it's a mini expo. Try to ask all kinds of questions before you begin any kind of planning to make sure your hard-earned sponsor funds don't go to waste and serve their purpose. Sorry. Yeah, and to keep the event relevant and be creative with it. With successful events, you can solidify your relationship with your current sponsors and attract even more sponsors for future events. Getting involved with global events, much like bringing the global home, you need to bring the local global, not only showcasing the local community and its work abroad. Always look for chances for events collaborations, be it in place or virtual events, and help engage your local devs in networking with the global. This will open doors for everyone, and you will be surprised by the state of progress some local games can go through. Also, don't be swept by numbers. Don't be swept by numbers. While numbers are important, they can be very misleading. For example, the number for attendees for your event doesn't necessarily mean that this event has accomplished its goals. If it's a recurring event, you can find that not all those who have attended the previous event has returned for the new installation of it. You can, hold the largest, let's say, game jam site in the world, but if the attendees don't know how to make a game or aren't interested, then you will end up with little to no output of games made during the game jam at all. What you need to be aiming for is a good balanced ratio. It doesn't matter having a lot of jammers, for example, as long as the ratio of the game submitted to the number of jammers doesn't look good or doesn't make sense. Always remember that the goal will be achieved by slow and steady progress, not with numbers. And coupled with the last point, it's important to make sure that your community is getting what it's needed. Like the same as when there's a tech-related seminar being held, it seems unnecessary to invite non-tech people to it. If you're holding a dev-oriented event, gamers might feel unwelcomed or not in place. With this, while this sounds intuitive or easy enough, it's actually one of the hardest things you can go through while building a community. You can't keep making events all year around, but you still need to keep engaging the community. Podcasts and newsletters and blogs are usually a great way for it. You will need to solidify your online profile by building a social media outlet or a good website that is, the hub for all the created online content that you are doing through your community. I find it helpful in this case to reach out for local influencers, whether gamers or game devs, to help out with the community engagement. And as mentioned, you won't be creating events all year round, but try to make the events or meetups or any sort of activity you're doing consistent. Most, if not all, of the great conventions do so. I mean, you probably have some of the yearly events pinned down in your calendar already, despite them not being announced yet, because they are consistent and you know when they will be held. This is needed to ground your local community to the local events, and it helps them with the retention rate every time, knowing that a certain event or activity, or even a blog post or podcast, come out when they're supposed to come out on their time. Also remember that it's okay if the numbers don't appeal to you every time. Like for a monthly meetup, for example, you get less attendees than usual. With consistency every month, eventually these numbers will grow. With consistency, repetitiveness can be an easy trap. Keep everything fresh and look for new ideas. Repetitiveness can make the community feel that they have nothing more to offer and can be such a letdown and a few steps back. You can help avoid it by involving partners and volunteers, especially volunteers who have newly joined the community, because they mainly can see what the community needs to grow. Always include fresh eyes while having the vision clear. Don't try doing everything by yourself. And involving partners and specifying everyone's roles as the community grows will ease its operation. And this will also allow you to know how to pass it on. Remember that you don't own the community. Your time will eventually come to leave the community management to someone else and hand over the baton. It's important not to feel like owning everything, because you're not doing this for yourself. You're doing it for the greater good of the local industry. So what about you? What do you think your community needs to grow? Thanks for tuning in and listening, and I hope that was, really informative. Sorry for cutting it short.
That was a great talk, Norhan. I was
you.
thinking the whole time, wow, so many people will benefit from this talk.
Thank you.
Was
That's the
really,
hope.
yes, of course, it was really informative, especially talking about, not to be repetitive. Um, because I think that is an easy trap that a lot of organizations like fall into.
Yeah, and it's once you sort of get hooked in this trap, it's so hard to get yourself out of it. So yeah, it's one of the hardest things really, I think, in community management, community work.
It is. And one of the
Mm.
questions is what types of events do you suggest for monthly events?
For monthly events, it's also depends on how your community communicates. If the communication between the community is not that great, let's say there isn't a decent outlet where they can communicate their thoughts or feedback on their own game, a monthly meetup would be the best thing, because this will allow everyone to know everyone else, and even have more people join the community and help it grow. If everyone already knows everyone, then maybe having like a small game jam that does not stress out or have anyone sort of crunch to make games would be ideal, to have everyone keep in touch with their passion and creativity. So it largely depends on how the community itself locally stands or currently stands.
That's a really good answer, and those are even some good suggestions. Like, I think people don't really think about like a small jam, right? Like just something maybe over a weekend with just your participants being your community. That can be a great experience for
Yeah,
everyone.
especially if it's, it's going to happen every month. You won't have to stress yourself that you have to join this jam because it's not coming back unless, it's a yearly thing or a quarterly thing. So it's okay to miss it sometimes. So I wouldn't stress myself out.
That's a really good point. So, thank you. That was a great talk. We don't have any other questions right now, but I know people will really benefit from watching this talk again once it's recorded. And
Mm.
that is the end of Pathfindings for Africa and the Middle East. You were our last talk, so thank
Oh,
you very much.
thank you. And thank you for having me today. Bye-bye.
Bye.